Hi, this is Paul. I've been making a commentary on the Jordan Peterson-John Vervaeke conversation. I've done 3 parts of it. There's a wager out there between 2 members of the Chicago estuary, between Sam and Hank, that this commentary is going to be 4 volumes or 10 volumes. The pace we're going, Hank, who waged in 10, seems to be the favorite. Now, I actually hadn't done one of these for a week now, and I was sort of losing interest, which I tend to do, and I thought, well, maybe I won't do any more. But I was reading the comments, and people seem to appreciate them, and I know I've had a lot of Peterson stuff on my channel, and at some point, some of you who don't care for Peterson start leaving comments, enough of the Peterson stuff already. Well, something like this, there's going to be some Peterson stuff. So just don't watch it if you don't like it. But I listened to a couple other commentaries about the conversation. I really liked the Randos commentary. I really liked their title, Sophia via Nikia. I thought that was a great, wisdom through struggle, let's say, or wisdom through conquest. I thought that was a good title, and I really enjoyed that conversation, even all the times that Luke said disparaging things about me. Yes, I do listen, Luke. But no, all kidding aside, it was a great conversation. There's another good one out there, too, by Damon Walter. Now, he had done some commentary about the Peterson-Zizek conversation, and this conversation, did the dude shave off his hair? If you got hair, wear it. Someday you might not have it. Enjoy it while you've got it, Damon. Or Damien. Is it Damon or Damien? Anyway, I thought that was a really good commentary, too, and I really liked how he was walking through those rice paddies and making his points, and very impressive. It was really enjoyable. So if you're looking for more commentary, definitely watch the Randos, and if you're not subscribed to the Randos United channel, if you like content on my channel, there's similar content with the Randos. And so Damon Walter, and I'll put both of those links in the comment section. We had just sort of ended one section, and Jordan asked John to summarize Western civilization. So let's jump in there. We'll try and make sure I get my sound looking good here.
I think the West is the attempt to, if I had to try and summarize the West, what an audacious thing to try and do.
See, Ruck said that, because I asked him why Dionysius transformed into Christ, because we were answering simple questions too, and he said, well, Greece met Judaism.
Now, it's helpful to know a little bit about Nietzsche in this. The Apollonian and the Dionysian are philosophical and literary concepts represented by a duality between the figures of Apollo and Dionysus from Greek mythology. Its popularization is widely attributed to the work of The Birth of Tragedy by Friedrich Nietzsche. Through the terms that already were in use prior to this, such as the writing of poets Friedrich Hölderlin, historian Johann Joachim Winckelmann, and others. The word Dionysian occurs as early as 1608 in Edward Topsell's zoological treatise, The History of Serpents. The concept has been widely invoked and discussed within Western philosophy and literature. In Greek mythology, Apollo and Dionysus are both sons of Zeus. Apollo is the god of the sun, of rational thinking and order, and appeals to logic, prudence, and purity. Dionysus is the god of wine and dance, of irrationality and chaos, and appeals to emotions and instincts. The ancient Greeks did not consider the two gods to be opposites or rivals, although they were often entwined by nature. And so you can go to the Wikipedia page and learn quite a bit about that. So let's go back to the conversation.
Yep. Said that, because I asked him why Dionysius transformed into Christ, because we were answering simple questions too, and he said, well, Greece met Judaism.
Yeah, but Judaism also met Greece. I mean, Philo starts theology because of the interaction with Platonic philosophy.
Philo, of course, the great Jewish scholar, Philo of Alexandria, about the time, if I recall, a little earlier than Paul of Tarsus.
I think Christianity is trying to integrate agape and logos together. That's how I try to understand its project.
Christianity is trying to integrate agape and logos. I think that's, you could do a lot. You could do far worse in terms of understanding Christianity than that phrase.
And whether or not
please,
the West
please clarify that claim.
Sure. So I mean, we've talked a lot about the Greek heritage of logos, and logos is also central within.
Especially in the book of John.
Yeah, especially in the book of John.
And saying that metaphorically with regard to you as well.
But also in the epistle of John is where John also said God is agape, right? And then that's the epistle of John. He makes that famous statement. And
it's if you spend enough time with higher critics and even evangelical scholars, the connecting of the Gospel of John, the book of Revelation, the epistles of John with, let's say, John the Apostle in sort of this offhand way, it's really quite dramatic, because I'm not skeptical on these fronts, but it's really quite interesting. And neither are, they're psychologists and they know a fair amount of philosophy, but biblical studies not their thing.
And the idea is there's something about the way the logos gathers things together so they belong together. That's the original.
Yeah, so that everything comes together.
Everything comes together. And then there's the idea in Plato of the ascent from the cave, the anagoge. You and Jonathan talked about this. The world discloses itself to me, that transforms me, and then I can see more deeply into the world, then that transforms me, and I do this reciprocal opening. And the thing is, that's very much, if you know.
And agape, that's...
Now, before we get to Pete, I mean, in the Randos conversation, they noted, I thought this was a really good point from the Randos conversation, or the Randos commentary, that, Vervaeke tends to, they're both professors, and they can both get very professorial. I remember when Obama was president and George Will commenting on Obama of how, he sort of thought he could set up there and lecture the nation and that would fix things. And people don't work this way. So they can both tend to be professorial, and Vervaeke can get going. Well, who am I to talk about being long-winded? I'm a pastor, so we have exactly the same problem. But Vervaeke can tend to get going with his long explanations. And so the Randos thought, perhaps they were also quite divided on why this video has the shape it has. But part of this is Peterson perhaps is intentionally sort of disrupting John as he gets sort of professorial and starts going down long explanations. So, but this point that John made, let's hear it again.
Then I can see more deeply into the world, then that transforms me, and I do this reciprocal opening.
So that anagoge, this is a big point in John's awakening from the meaning crisis. Earlier in the commentary, he used the word transjective. So this back and forth. Now, I just finished my recording about living eyes up versus living eyes down. And I was making the point that for most of human history, society, especially us as groups, have been living eyes up. So we look up at the emergent, and then our eyes move from up to down. Modernity sorts living eyes down first, and slowly moves up. And so what we're seeing, as we've had 100 years or so, actually more in terms of modernity, but a long time of living eyes down, that now we have a lot of attempting to connect heaven and earth. And I see these two scholars as typifying that need now as a culture. And so then for John Vervaeke, the anagoge, the leaving the cave, the transjective, I go outside, being outside the cave changes me. That changes the way I see outside, and it's back and forth and back and forth. And I think that's a real strength of Vervaeke's system and position.
And the thing is, that's very much, if you know.
And agape, do you define that? That's love.
Yeah, accelerating mutual disclosure is how it's even disclosed.
Well, it seemed to me.
Accelerating mutual disclosure. Again, if you look at Meaning Crisis, I think it's either 13 or 15. It's actually his best description of agape is right before the one where he talks about agape, where agape is in the title. And it's mutually accelerating disclosure. That's one aspect. But agape, as opposed to phileo, is sort of shoulder to shoulder. Eros is sort of taking in each other. Agape is your well-being at my expense. It's in many ways the good kind of motherly love or parental love. It's the love of the superior to the inferior that affords agency to the inferior. And agape is this kind of love that nourishes and grows and empowers, often sacrificially.
Well, it seemed to me that the relationship between truth and love is that love is the something like the goal, and truth is its servant. It seems to me to be because so this is how I've worked it in my mind is that
sure.
Well, I think that truth is the best servant of reality. Truth is the servant of reality, and reality, I think, best manifests itself as love.
Well, one of the slogans I have,
I'd say the goal of reality is love. It's interesting listening to these two talk because, of course, being a Calvinist, I have a pretty significant Augustinian framework, and so we sort of lean heavily. The language I use is we're living in the age of decay, and in this age, love. The sacrificial quality of love could be at least partly attributed to the function of the age. And in the age to come, this agapic love won't be as sacrificial in this age. And this is typified, of course, by Christ on the cross, which is the example of love, the example of sacrificial love, especially, again, in the Gospel of John. But the culmination, basically, the age of decay is defeated by agapic love, and to riff on a great line by black preachers, you just can't outgive God. The age of decay exhausts itself trying to exhaust the inexhaustible, and God wins by, do you think you can decay me? Go ahead and keep sucking. And that's how death is defeated. By love.
That's why this power itself is love.
Well, one of the slogans I have in my
that's why this power claim is so abhorrent to me. The claim that power is the central.
The Randos also made the comment that Peterson seems to try to keep pulling John into culture war issues. And if you've listened to John, of course you can take some of what John says and apply it to culture war issues, but you're going to have to do that yourself. John isn't going to follow. John wants to keep to his lane. And, as a preacher, I appreciate that, because part of, I think, the corruption of the church in both the right and the left in America today has been its captivity to these culture war issues.
Motivating factor for the foreign.
Well, one of the slogans I have in my
that's why this power.
I would have liked to have heard the slogan.
Claim is so abhorrent to me. The claim that power is the central motivating factor for the Western endeavor is tantamount, I believe, to saying that it's the basic endeavor of the human species. And I think that's opposite of the truth. I think this agape is, and logos is more accurate. And so it's not just a counterclaim, it's an antithesis.
Well, I'm trying to pick up on.
And I think Peterson is right there. And you could map that onto sort of course, I'm dealing with Paul. I'm going to be dealing with the Apostle Paul for a while in my preaching. But it's the spirit of the age. And it's the relational movement of the age of decay is my well-being at your expense. Agape is the reverse of that. And so God exhausts the age of decay because you just can't outgive God. And so I think Peterson, critiquing this cynical analysis of human activity, reducing it all to, greedful power grabbing. It's sort of an Augustinianism on steroids. It's total depravity mapped beyond even what a Calvinist would map. And yes, Nate, I hear your complaint about Calvinist total depravity. Although many Calvinists will say it's the only of our doctrine that is easily verified by general revelation. But Peterson is right here, and let's hear what Vervaeke has to say.
What you're saying here, I'm
trying to touch on the culture wars, obviously.
Well, that's yeah. I think. For me, you're saying something very analogous to a critique that I've built in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
Well, let's hear it, man.
Well,
if I can shut up.
No, it's okay. I was going to say, one of my signatures is, it's in Latin, but it translates as love is its own way of knowing. And the kind of knowing there is like noticing, like nous, an insight,
Great.
realization.
That's the Egyptian eye.
Well, yes.
It's
attention, back to the Peterson-Peugeot conversation.
Noticing, it's not thinking, it's attention. And maybe you're tying that with that revelation of the form. You're tying that to that revelation of the form, and that...
Maybe what we should do is have John in a room, and we can pause Jordan and he can finish his thoughts and then go back to the next one. Maybe we need a John Vervaeke commentary on this conversation.
Conforming.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. That's exactly it. It's and this is very similar to the Buddhist idea of that the what you're trying to do is shape attention and mindfulness so that you get that reciprocal opening, so that your self-knowledge and the knowledge of the world become indistinguishable, become interpenetrating, like what you have when you really love somebody in a. It
was interesting how the self-knowledge. Luke in the Randos video noted that the one aspect of Calvinism that he retained from his time when he was in John Piper's church was Calvin's adage that to know you need. There's two kinds of knowledge you need. John Calvin says, to know God and to know yourself.
Committed long-term relationship, penetrating, like what you have when you really love somebody in a committed long-term relationship. Your knowing of yourself and your knowing of them become bound up because you indwell them and you internalize them, and they indwell you and internalize you, right? And
how much death of the old you has this involved for you? I know that's a strange.
Now, actually, him asking this question here. And now he's going to second guess himself.
Strange question.
No.
And it isn't a strange question because, again, I think part of what makes this video so difficult to listen to, and part of what has provoked my response, which, of course, the first piece of the commentary was very long, mostly on the nature of the video itself. But there are lots of layers to that, and part of that, I think, is, they are colleagues. They do have a history together. Jordan Peterson's journey has cost him plenty. Well, what about John? Well, John didn't go down the culture war rabbit trail. John didn't ride the status rocket. John didn't, fall like Icarus. What does this cost John? It's a good question. And it's, again, back to the Randos comment. I really enjoyed that Randos commentary. I learned a lot from it. I'm so... The real reward, it sounds so cliche, the real reward of the last 3 years have been the people that I've met. Just look at the guys on that Randos commentary. Luke, I joke with Luke, but I do love Luke. Michael, what a gift. Sam, Nate. I haven't even had a direct conversation with Nate of any substance. Julian was one of the first guys to come into contact with me, and all these guys, they're just tremendous human beings, and they've got so much wisdom, and they've learned so much. They're all younger than I am, but they I learned from each of them. So I've just distracted myself. But yeah, what has this cost John?
It's a good question. It's a damn good question.
Why?
It's a good question because
and now Peterson even distracted John from answering the question by why is it a good question, instead of getting to the question itself. But it is a good question, and it deserves to be answered why it's a good question.
Brings up the idea of the fact that there's a level of knowing that deals with the process of identification itself, in both senses of the word identifying, designating something and assuming an identity. In both those senses of identification, the kind of knowing that I most care about, this participatory knowing, involves an identification.
Now we're back to the participatory as one of the 4 Ps. Actually, I wish that they had taken this in a different way, which is you have to love to know, and if that's the case, and if it's agapic love in the age of decay, that will mean suffering. You know Christ in his suffering, the Apostle Paul says.
And therefore, if we're talking about the transformation at that level, we're talking about, like, that's what I mean about when I talk about knowing yourself. I don't mean representing yourself. I mean the knowing that constitutes you as a self, and that's what's undergoing the transformation.
Okay, that's the conocer. That's the 3 Ps of the 4 P.
When you're engaged in participatory knowing, when I really love my partner, right? I'm not just forming.
What does it mean that you love them? Do you think, if you had to express that, how would you express that?
Well, I mean, it means a lot. It means that reciprocal opening I was talking about, but it means that I mean, it's like what Eckhart says, and again, I don't mean to be pretentious. Like he says you have to make a space.
I don't think you're going to be able to help it in this conversation.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair enough. He says, you have to.
God forgive us.
The goal of Rhineland mysticism was to this kind of receptivity. You have to make a space so that the Son of God can be born within you. And again, no, not being irreligious, but for me to love my partner is to cultivate that kind of receptivity, a space in which she can be within me. And I don't mean in any purely romantic metaphorical sense. What I mean is she finds a purchase within me whereby she can realize herself in both senses of the word realize. And she can come to trust that space, that place of realization will always be available for her. And she can come to rely on it, a place through which she can transcend herself when she needs to. I mean, and being committed to that, and finding that inseparably bound up with my own project of trying to realize who I am. That's for me the core of what it is to love somebody.
And when I was playing this in the car with my wife when we were coming back from our little weekend trip, my wife said, "Stop that video," and I stopped it, and she said, "Play that again," and that's really good. And another one of the comments that the randos made was part of what made this video so good. And I don't know if it was Sam or Nate. I think it might have been Nate who made this comment that so often Vervaeke is at his best when you get him out of the professorial mold and get him into the relational mode. And that, when although he very much lectured at us professor about agape, but this, I should just play that agape clip for you, because I put it on my clips channel because it's just so good.
Be incarnating as a kairos to change the history of the world and to offer you to change your own personal history is a different kind of love. This is agape. We have to distinguish between 3 kinds of love: eros, philia, and agape. See, eros is the love that seeks to be one with something. And that can be spiritual, like being one with nature, or it can be being one with a cookie by eating it. Of course, we come to think of eros erotically, right? Being one with somebody by having sex with them. Right? But remember, Socrates knew ta erotica, which wasn't just sex. Socrates knew what to care about. This is philia. So this is the love that is satisfied through consummation. Philia, this is the love that seeks cooperation. This is the love in which we experience reciprocity. We love the cookie because we can consume it. We love our friends because we are in reciprocity with them. What kind of love is this? And this is what Jesus claimed was how God loved individuals. This is the love that a parent has for a child. This is not the love of consummation. You're not trying to consume the child. That's evil. And it's not friendship. You're not, like, when you bring a child home from the hospital, and I've done this twice, right? That's not your friend. It's not even a person. You can't, it's basically a slug. But here's the astonishing thing. You love it. Not because of any way you can consume it or be one with it. Ew. Ew. You don't love it because, hey, what great friendship. You love it, right? You love it because by loving it, you turn a non-person into a person. It's the closest thing to a miracle, and that sounds hackney, I know, but stop back and think about this. You depend on agape. It's because people loved you before you were a person that you have become the person you are. Love turns non-person animals into moral agent persons. It's like somehow if I could just care about, right, my sofa enough, it would turn into a Ferrari or something. It's that powerful. And here's what Jesus was offering. That love can be exacted and made available for all. Here's what is on offer. Here's why Christianity will take the Roman Empire culturally. With agape, Christianity can say to all of the non-persons of the Roman Empire, all the women, all the children, all the non-male citizens, all the sick, all the poor, all the widowed, can take all of those non-persons and say, we will turn you into persons. Persons that belong to the kingdom of God. We'll take another look at this in more detail next time. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
That's great. I wish you luck with it.
Well, that's all we can ever wish anybody. I mean, if you're
that and the grace of God,
or that there is a life to this relationship that will eventually grow strong enough that we can come to trust in it as much as we trust in each other, and that's what I believe is happening for me. And I think
let's listen to that again.
Relationship,
luck, the grace of God, and then this.
Or that there is a life to this relationship that will eventually grow strong enough that we can come to trust in it.
There's a life to this relationship that will eventually grow strong enough that we can come to trust in it. See, again, there's a lot of Christianity under this talk. And when they were talking about logos, the golden thread, I mean, they're looking for sources of life and power that are not enwrapped in human skin. Now, if you look at my starting living eyes up versus starting living eyes down, if you start living eyes up, you get to that quicker because you're coming top down. They're trying to come from the bottom up. It's going to be a while. It's going to be a ways until you get there, if you get there at all.
As much as we trust in each other. And that's what I believe is happening for me. And I think there's kind of three loves involved, and they're all bound up together. There's, Socratic self-love, not narcissistic self-love. there's the love of the other, and then there's the love of the relationship. But that for me is like a trinity. Talking about as if those are separate is the mistake. You have to talk about it analytically as if they're separate, but they interpenetrate and interafford each other in a profound way. They become
Sam, who knows more about the Trinity than I do, and even because he's always trying to disprove it, notes how much Augustinian Trinitarianism these two actually voice and then sort of back away from in this video.
Become, in an important sense, indistinguishable from each other.
I've been trying to develop a counterposition to the claim that our society is predicated on the expression of power.
Okay, remember he was there before. Now we're kind of going back to that again.
And that our social relations are structured as a consequence of the expression of power, and therefore, by inference, our prime motivation is power, none of which I believe to be true. I think all of that's an aberration in the deepest sense. And I think that what we're talking about is the true path, let's say, to the degree that any of us are capable of realizing that. And I certainly don't claim to be. I struggle with it to an immense degree. But I do believe that it's the proper counterposition. And then so what do you think about that? I mean, is the culture war...
That's the second time he's asked this question in just a few minutes.
We're in that deep? I mean, is the counterclaim genuinely the adversarial position? I mean, what else would it be if it's not saying... It's basically saying that the claim is something like the driving force of Western culture, but I don't know how you distinguish that from the driving force of human culture exactly. I don't think most of the people who make that claim would say that there's something... It's hard for them to say that there's something radically different about Western culture and the world spirit, let's say, without only attributing all that is negative to Western culture. And that's, I think, very difficult to do. So if the mainstream of Western culture is the mainstream of human culture, or akin to it, so akin to that shamanic tradition, for example, then the claim is that mainstream is the desire for power. And that's the opposite of what we're saying, genuinely the opposite. It's the antithesis to that, because that isn't Philo Nicaea the antithesis to?
Yeah, I think it is. Well, I mean, that's part of it.
Is it genuinely the antithesis? I mean, so is this a claim of satanic possession of the West? I mean, is the culture war that deep? Well, I don't know. I mean, the claim is that it's about fundamentals, right? It's a fundamental critique of Western society.
He just answered his own question, and again, there's this drive at the culture war questions.
It means fundamental. That's why Derrida went after phallogocentrism.
Yeah, and I think, and there's in Foucault does similar things. But the thing you have to remember is, toward the ends of Derrida's career, right? He's reaching into Neoplatonic mysticism. Negative theology is something he starts to take an interest in, and Foucault, technologies of the self, and.
Now, one of the common critiques I hear about Peterson from academics is that he treats Derrida and Foucault too lightly. He doesn't go far enough. And whereas John by no means sort of hit him with that, he sort of pivots into that here.
He gets very deeply interested in the work of Pierre Hadot, right, and what is ancient philosophy and the wisdom tradition and Philia Sophia, and he starts to turn towards it and starts to recognize it as
I
something.
know nothing of that. I know nothing of that.
Yeah, well, that's what. So, I mean.
Well, that's very interesting, and then he dies.
Yeah, Foucault also.
Or Foucault. No, Derrida. We were speaking of Derrida.
I was speaking of both. I said you see yes, Foucault getting very interested in negative theology, Neoplatonic mysticism. And then you see Foucault getting very interested in, Stoicism and Pierre Hadot's work on the whole Socratic tradition.
And so what do you make? Okay, so is it reasonable for me to assume that Derrida and Foucault's thinking is at the bottom of this counterclaim that I'm discussing, which culminates in the assumption that power and is at the core of the Western endeavor, like the exercise of arbitrary power?
Now, Peterson is often criticized for insufficient self-criticism. But let's be fair here. He has just asked John Vervaeke, he's just opened himself and said, am I being fair? Am I being true with this? And again, I've this complaint against Peterson that he isn't self-critical enough is something I've never bought. And I think if you listen to enough of him, you hear him questioning and countering himself. And he both sets that up as a virtue theoretically, and you can watch him practice it practically.
Is that the center of the culture war, that claim?
I think that's symptomatic of something that's been going on much more deeply and much longer.
Fair enough. I don't know if that answers my question.
Well, let him finish.
But, because I'm looking for a corrective or perhaps for agreement, but that's completely up to you, because if it's a corrective then that I need, so be it. I mean, have I taken this in the wrong direction, or am I seeing it clearly?
Again, that's a great example of Peterson saying, correct me if I'm wrong. And I think with a degree of trust here, I think he's being completely honest and truthful in asking John to critique that.
So I want to say something other than those. I want to say that our relationship to power as a criterion of realness should be properly acknowledged rather than be made an absolute or be set up as an antithesis. I think what's coming out, I would argue, out of 4E cognitive science is the growing claim that we don't have a single way of knowing the world. We have a propositional way that, as it says, that is carried in proposition and results in beliefs. We have, which is knowing that, but we have also procedural knowing. We know how to do things, and it doesn't result in beliefs, it results in skills. We have perspectival knowing, which is neither about belief or skills. It's about states of consciousness and how they create situational awareness for us. And then we have this participatory knowing that we've been talking about throughout, where I know not at the level of my beliefs or my skills or even my states of consciousness, but I know in terms of my traits of my character and how I've been shaped in order to fit the world in a way that seems to fundamentally matter to me. And I think
so right at that, I mean, if there's something that John succeeded in tying this film together, it's his point about the 4 Ps. It's his point about these two ways of knowing. And I think that's a good way into John's whole project.
Each one of these has a different sense of realness attached to it. I think propositional has truth. I think procedural, our skills give us a sense of realness when they empower us. Our perspectival knowing, what's the sense of realness there? Well, we're getting a good sense of this from virtual reality work. It's a sense of presence, And then what's the sense of realness for participatory knowing? And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about this, like people try to capture it with these words of faith and connection and belonging and fittedness and at one-ment. And I think instead, I think what's happening is our culture is realizing that we have tried to reduce all the knowing, a la Descartes, to purely propositional knowing, and then we're slowly realizing the inadequacy of that. I think the fact that we are trapped in ideological battle means we think we can capture all of the meaning-making machinery at the propositional level. But what 4E cognitive science is saying is, no, you talked about tracking. The skill of tracking affords our conceptual abilities, but also states of consciousness afford us being in relationship to the world. You can have totally ineffable states that nevertheless seem the most real to you. And also these transformations of ourself also carry with them a sense of realness. And I think what's happened is the West is realizing, but in a negative way, that the propositional reduction is inadequate, insufficient, and it's groping for the closest thing at hand. And the closest thing at hand is what technology makes salient to it, which is power and control. This is Heidegger's critique. But I think we have to go deeper.
Okay, so that was a long stretch. And I want to summarize it because he's just walked through his 4 Ps of knowing, which he's going to return to again and again in this video. But he did so in the context of the culture war. And what he's saying is, and I think he's correct in this, that modernity focused on the propositional. Why did modernity focus on the propositional? In one way, it was a function of living eyes down and starting eyes down. So we want it's, and I think it maps onto Jordan Peterson's The Beginning of Maps of Meaning, A World of Objects. So modernity begins in the propositional. And what he's saying is that as it becomes increasingly apparent to many that the propositional is insufficient to go the whole way. Now, again, some of you have started to pick up on my little meme about the Naturalist Lab Leak. What do I mean by the Naturalist Lab Leak? Well, what the scientific method discovered is that if I close one eye and I take out personhood, I take out consciousness, and I establish sort of an imaginative monarchical vision where there's a world of objects, I can use this power to basically scale up propositionally, scale up mechanistically, and I can know things very powerfully. Well, pretty soon we were doing this in the lab, and then we said, well, let's take this out of the lab. Let's do this with people. And, well, we learned some things, but it also invoked a meaning crisis. And so, now remember, this is also in the context of Derrida and Foucault, of whom I know next to nothing about. But what John says basically is that at the end of modernity, as modernity is, as the car is running out of gas on this pure propositional way of knowing, we're a little frantic. And so we look around in technology, and what we find is power. And so, again, this is his answer to the culture war question.
We have to say, no, there's a place for that, but your skills ultimately depend on your situational awareness. And your situational awareness, the states of consciousness you get access to, ultimately depend on your character.
Now, actually, I think this maps nicely onto a point that one of Jordan Peterson's best conversations with Roger Scruton in the UK, where Peterson talks about competence. And I think in some ways, part of the three P's together for Vervaeke maps nicely onto competence. Because for Peterson, competence is sort of a way out of this what bloody postmodernism trap that Peterson is always seeing. You don't hire a plumber by the plumber's gender or by the plumber's skin color or ethnicity or country of origin. You hire a plumber on the basis of competence. And that's all of these three P's. That's participatory, it's procedural, and it's perspectival. A plumber majors in that. Now, there's propositions all along the way, of course. And my critique of Luke in the Rando's commentary on this would be almost every time you dogmatize against dogma, you just reinforce dogma. Every time you use propositions in order to undercut propositions, you once again demonstrate the utility of propositions. So propositional knowing is not going away. But as Vervaeke nicely says, it is overplayed in modernity and is insufficient. Now, again, Peterson expresses this without getting into Vervaeke's 4 Ps with Peterson's meme of competence. Because again, the plumber, it's highly participatory, it's procedural, it's perspectival to a degree. And there's propositional in it, but that's sort of the world of the plumber. That's the world of expertise, of competence. And so in that way, there's sort of a nice place where Peterson's project and Vervaeke's project can actually map on each other, even though I haven't heard Vervaeke talk about Jordan. And John, if you're listening to this, check out Jordan's conversation with Roger Scruton, where they go into it. This is a common theme in Jordan. And Jordan hasn't heard about the 4 Ps, which is evident through this video. And if this video becomes the first of hopefully a longer collaboration, understanding John's 4 Ps will be essential for understanding John's bigger project.
We have to bring back that whole rich philosophical anthropology.
Why do they ultimately depend on your care? Well, that's a lot to swallow in 10 statements.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to scuttle back to my power claim momentarily and then try to wrap my head around what you said.
Okay.
Well,
sorry, I didn't mean to dump so much.
No, not at all.
And again, I mean, I've been listening to both of these guys for 3 years now, and I've probably listened to Jordan more than John has, and I know I've listened to John more than Jordan has, and so that's part of the reason I'm doing these commentaries, because I will never claim to fully grasp or exhaust either of the systems that these two men are presenting. They're simply too massive. But to the degree that I know them, I can sort of take them and find, as J.P. Marceau always talks about, bridges between them, which I think will help both of them collaborate and map. And I think, as was true in 2015 when they spoke, and before then, I think there is benefit to collaboration between them.
I mean, it might have been the proper answer. The proper answer is often that the question isn't sophisticated enough, but it sort of throws the questioner because he's operating from within the space where that's the germane issue, right? So my claim was that the culture war right now is being fought over the claim that the fundamental animating tendency of Western civilization is the desire to exercise and the exercising of arbitrary power.
And that would basically make, again, that's sort of Augustinian anthropology on steroids. It's too grim a perspective on the human heart. And Peterson is basically saying, no, we are capable of more than that, and the evidence for Western society not being simply motivated by, let's use one of the 7 deadly sins, avarice. Western civilization is not mere avarice. And John, I think there in his answer says, we have sort of looked to power because at the end of our propositional way of life, a way of living, as we are longing to get back into the perspectival, the participatory, and the procedural. I think we could probably critique some of that with Ellul. He's such a thoroughgoing existentialist, though. And in that way, Ellul's so deeply embedded in modernity that there really is some irony in his anarchism. Anyway, but I think it's a potent observation that John is making about within the 3P ways of knowing, technology is training us to be avaricious. And so from there, the critique comes. And it is true that once we can't, and Peterson makes this comment often, once we can do something, we often do that thing.
And I believe that to be fundamentally wrong.
Yes.
And so I phrased it as an adversarial hypothesis, as a satanic hypothesis, essentially from a symbolic perspective, that the accusation is that the West is possessed by this satanic demand for power, and that's its characteristic spirit. And I don't believe that. I believe that its characteristic spirit is philia sophia, yes, fundamentally, and that is a contamination which occurs repeatedly, which would be philia Nicaea. I think if we're using your language properly, or perhaps we're slandering philia Nicaea, I mean, because I think part of the claim that you're making is that there's a positive aspect to philia Nicaea that's being damned as the mere arbitrary expression of power. Well, I do think that's something like series like Suits are getting at, right? Because you have these characters in that drama who are motivated primarily by philia Nicaea, but you see philia Sophia emerge between them, and that's what makes them tolerable as characters. But both those things seem to be interrelated. One leads to the other, and that seems to be related to your wrestling argument in some sense, and maybe to mine.
Yes. And
so okay, so you think that this So is your claim, let me get this right, at least in part, that,
please,
first of all, I want to know what you think of my claim about this central argument. What you're doing is saying that's a sideshow on a much deeper, that's a sideshow of a much deeper problem.
Mm-hmm. And I think, again, Peterson is correctly tracking here. And it's not an easy thing to track, given, I mean, Peterson is a famous, rabbit trailer. And the Damian Walker commentary brings that out. But Peterson is tracking here.
I mean, that's quite the bloody claim, John. It's not easy for me to process, but
no, that's fair.
And yeah, well, so I'm having some trouble with that. But do you think that invalidates my claim, or does it just render it irrelevant?
No, it doesn't render it irrelevant.
Given this discussion, okay. So is it okay if we deal with that and then move on?
Sure. I mean, I guess what.
Okay, am I misreading early Derrida and Foucault by attributing to them the claim that it is power that they identify as the central spirit? And am I wrong in saying that that's just a modified Marxist claim? It's a transformation of the idea of the class struggle into the domain of the sheer struggle for power?
I think you could make a claim that Foucault sees the deep interpenetration, the earlier Foucault, maybe even the middle Foucault, see.
Part of my, I think it's definitely the work of academics to look at roots here, but there's also just the common, there's the common logic of the swallowing of an assumption, and I think it's the swallowing of that sort of hyper-Augustinian, pessimistic anthropology that says all people are simply avaricious. But once you make that claim, you're going to have to get stuck with something like all white people are avaricious and people of color aren't. And once you start down that road, you undo exactly what Christianity achieved in the Roman Empire that John articulated so beautifully, that agapic love makes persons out of women and slaves and children, which, the Apostle Paul said, in Christ there is no slave nor free, no Jew nor Gentile, nor male nor female. What did Paul mean by that? And I think Paul meant exactly what John was saying. Now, back to Foucault and Derrida.
Is a deep interpenetration between power and knowledge. For Derrida, I do not think the différance really is a good translation, is well translated by the term power. Différance is much closer to, what I would call relevance realization, the idea that that the relevance of our claim can't be bound. I mean, somebody within classical cognitive science, computational science, Jerry Fodor makes a similar argument that the relevance of a proposition can't be captured within the syntax or semantics of the proposition. I mean, that's the main thing that Derrida is on about. So
that's a consequence of what we're bringing to the table. Because the relevance is the interpenetration of the semantic and the syntactic with the
also
unique.
The pragmatics that goes beyond it, because I mean, this is the central claim of pragmatics, that I always have to convey way more than I can say, because I have to rely on you, picking out all the possible implications, the ones that are relevant out of all the possible.
Right, which means I have to know you, which means I have to embody whatever it is that I'm speaking.
Now back to where he was before.
You're back to my claim that the character traits are at the bottom of this. Right? If you
go ahead, man.
Right? If we can't actually conform at the level of our character, we can't.
Right, so that's trust.
Yeah.
And so when you trust what's honest.
Yeah.
You trust what's honest. So you trust the logos.
Right. And
because that's honesty driven by love.
Right, but I don't think.
And so if I trust you, that's what I trust. So I want to go back to something. Yeah. I asked you to define love, and I'm going to define it on my terms now. Please. And that is the best in me serving the best in you. And I think that's the deepest pleasure. That's the deepest and most lasting pleasure. And it is the most fundamental motivation. It's the inexhaustible source. Because if I can do that, whenever I do that, I feel that I'm being properly.
Well,
and there's nothing better than that.
And you can extend that to...
And what Jordan just said there is a mouthful. And now that I've sort of slowing this conversation down, painstakingly going through it. Now, again, when these two are having this conversation, they're in sort of a dialogos flow state. And they're tracking it. When this is part of the weakness of this technology, when we listen to it, or we're washing the dishes, we're driving the car, this is a tremendously complex conversation. But the claim that Peterson made right there is, in fact, that love is the center. And again, to bring in Tom Holland, where is this not Christian? And where did Jordan get this from? He didn't get it from the Greeks. This comes out of Christianity.
You can extend that to well,
and there's nothing better than that.
And you can extend that to the world, to situations, places.
Well, I think that's what you're supposed to do by accepting the proposition that God is love. I mean, it's God is love and God is logos. Those are both there. So then the question, to some degree, is the rank order of the two. And I would say God is truth within love. And that's the animating spirit of mankind. And that's a way different claim than the one the atheists are going after, by the way.
Yeah.
Think about it, everyone. Is truth in the service of love not the best animating spirit of mankind when it isn't pursuing an aberration? We can all ask ourselves that question.
Now Peterson's in preacher mode. Sounds like some of the guys in my Bible study.
I think that's
although they don't use words like this.
A good question to ask. I think,
Thank you, John.
No, what I mean is I think it reorients us to the
We can put that on a T-shirt.
And it's interesting that the Randos commentators thought that, maybe this is just kind of an inside joke between them. Might have come up in the pre-recording conversation. Might be something that predates this video. Again, and me, having listened to the Randos conversation, having listened to the Damon Walker conversation, now this is a great example of Vervaeke's the Anagage. I come out of the cave, I watch this conversation, I watch the commentary, I go back to this conversation, back and forth and back and forth. I not only grow in my knowledge of this conversation, but because these two men have wisdom and knowledge of the world, I grow in the knowledge of the world. And we grow together in this.
Is truth in the service of love a good question?
I guess I see them as more. I see them as more interpenetrating. I want to make a stronger relationship between them than just a relationship of service. This is
how about her, man?
Yeah, that this is why I like the term realization. That love is a way of affording realization, and the deepest knowing we have of reality is in realization. That's what if I had to.
Okay, so it seems to me. Okay, so I'll make an appendage to my claim.
Right.
The reality that is most justifiable is brought about by the action of truth in the service of love.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is I see truth. I think you're using it, and I've heard you use true as something beyond a correspondence between the semantic content of a proposition and reality. I've heard you talk about right, and we even use that when we use the phrase.
Yes,
true
it seems to incorporate some of those other dimensions that you've been talking about.
Exactly.
Okay, well, great, man.
So the arrow is true, and this is mapping onto the 3 Ps, not just the correspondence in the physical world of some semantic reality in a word.
Fill me in.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to get at that power is a way of, when your shot is true, your skill has been effective, and you're going to hit the mark, right? But presence is also a way in which things are true to form, right? And then the participatory knowing is when we're like the deepest sense of true, which is related to trust and being betrothed to the world in an important way. So if you will allow me to expand what you mean by true to cover all of those dimensions.
Betrothed to the world in that you extend the same courtesy to the world that you described extending to your partner.
Exactly. I think the answer to nihilism isn't some propositional answer. This is what I get from Nishitani.
Yeah, right.
It's to relearn, and I mean this deeply, like in the Buddhist sense of sati, to remember what it is to fall in love with reality, to fall in love with being. And if that's what you're saying is the
now,
animating
you think that's
thing,
what Sam Harris is striving for in his spirituality? Well, and it's not a throwaway answer. It's like, what's he up to exactly? I mean, isn't he on a Sophia?
It's interesting. I mean, Peterson is task switching very quickly in this, and interesting that Sam Harris comes up at this point.
Finally, a Sophia adventure.
I think everybody is, how can I put this? Everybody lives from the non-propositional kinds of knowing emphasized by Plato. And that's what all of the scholastic research is pointing to now, that Socrates was trying to point people to the non-propositional knowing, the procedural, the perspectival, the participatory. I think we all have to live from that, given a lot of things I've said and a lot of things we've said.
Well, maybe you could expound on those a bit more for us and clarify a bit more. And so you said the answer to nihilism, that isn't exactly a comment on my comment that the culture war is about a claim that the drive to power is at the core of Western being.
I think that's an equally nihilistic claim. That's my point. The claim, the
claim is nihilistic, or my claim about that is nihilistic, or both.
That power is a fundamental reality is an attempt to assuage the wounding of nihilism, but it is fundamentally mistaken in its endeavor. It is constituted the wrong way. It's like framing a problem the wrong way, so that you do not get the insight needed to get to the solution of the problem. So I think of it as a fundamental misframing. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay,
and that's why I'm hesitant to say either yes or no to it, because
I get it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I believe that it is misframed, because I don't think it would be taking us in such a pathological direction. The whole argument,
exactly, if
it wasn't misframed.
And so part of what I'm trying to, and for me, this dovetails with the increasing crescendo within 4E cognitive science about embodiment and embedded and extended and enacted cognition is most
right. You see this as a subset argument of one of those elements.
Yes.
But I mean, that's a huge, but like I said, I'm really having a hard time. I know what you mean, and I suppose what you're trying to do with everything you do is to expound upon this, but I certainly want you to expound upon this. Let's go into those three modes of alternate cognition a little bit more deeply.
Okay, so
I've got someone coming to church, got to replace some outlets, because the GFI that the fridge is plugged into shouldn't be plugged into a fridge, shouldn't be plugged into a GFI. These are the kind of things that you deal with as a pastor. And one of our members is an electrician, so he's meeting me here after work, and we're going to look into it. And anyway, so that's enough for now. Now we're going to get into, again, more directly the 4 Ps, but this was a good session. And again, the more I get into this video, the more of the, let me say it this way, the more of the logos I see in this video. I mean that in a few different ways. And the more value I see in this video. And so the more value I feel there is in walking through it slowly. Now, again, I am doing this on camera, making content for YouTube, but this is also, in a sense, you're holding me accountable. And so I take valuable, precious time to do this. And I am growing from it, and I am learning from it. And when I do that, I want to keep doing it. So thank you for your time and attention. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Your comments are very helpful.